Hidden inside the most sacred building in Jewish history sat a wooden box that struck people dead for making the smallest mistake. A few rooms away, an altar burned for centuries without ever going out. Down the hall was a basin made entirely from the mirrors of enslaved women. 2,000 years ago, every one of these objects had a job in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Today, the temple is gone. The objects, missing, scattered, or buried. But almost every one of them is still hiding in plain sight. So, let's explore 5 of the most mysterious objects in the Jewish temple and the surprising places they still show up today. Thousands of years ago, this hilltop in Jerusalem was home to 2 successive holy temples. They were the epicenter of Jewish spiritual life, where Jews from across the ancient land of Israel flocked to celebrate holidays and atone for their sins. The temple sat on sacred ground. According to tradition, this was the place where Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and where, some sources say, creation itself began. And inside the temple were ritual objects so powerful and so mystical, only one person on earth was permitted to be in its presence. Number 5. The Ark. The Ark was the most sacred object in the Jewish temple, and, according to Jewish tradition, the holiest object on earth. It was kept inside the innermost chamber of the temple, a space known as the Holy of Holies, believed to sit at the literal meeting point between heaven and earth. But what exactly was the Ark? Well, the Ark functioned kind of like a Russian doll. 2 wooden chests, one nestled in the other, both covered in pure gold, adorned with cherubim and fitted with poles on either side. Now, no one was ever permitted to touch it directly. No one was even allowed to enter the Holy of Holies and be in the presence of the Ark, except for the high priest. And even he could only enter once a year, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Because the Ark wasn't just holy, it was dangerous. We see this in the book of Samuel. As the Ark is being transported, the oxen pulling the cart suddenly stumble, and a man named Uzzah instinctively reaches out to steady the Ark so it won't fall. And then Uzzah drops dead, as if struck by lightning. It's one of the Bible's most difficult and confounding moments, but the story reveals something important. The Ark wasn't just a religious artifact or national treasure. The Ark represented the overwhelming presence of the divine itself, something powerful, real, and not within human control. But what was kept inside the Ark that made it so powerful? Stored in its center were the tablets, 2 stone slabs inscribed with the 10 Commandments that Moses received from God at Mount Sinai, the physical symbol of the covenant between God and the Jewish people, which is why it was called the Ark of the Covenant, Aron HaBrit. The Ark contained the Word of God. But the Ark also held something else. You see, God actually gave Moses 2 sets of tablets. The first time Moses received the 10 Commandments, he descended from Mount Sinai, tablets in hand, only to find the Israelites worshiping the golden calf. Devastated by their spiritual betrayal, he smashed the tablets at the foot of the mountain. Later on, he receives another set, this time whole and undamaged, a second chance for the Jewish people, a manifestation of God's forgiveness. So in the Ark, alongside the complete tablets, were fragments of the first tablets too, which teaches us something important. Judaism doesn't erase human brokenness. Actually, it's the opposite. Judaism accepts our limitations and even considers them to be holy. Falling down and getting up again is part and parcel of the spiritual journey. So, where's the Ark today? According to Jewish tradition, the Ark was hidden away by King Josiah near the end of the First Temple period, before the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, which means that when the Second Temple was built later, the Holy of Holies stood empty. For centuries, people have searched far and wide for the Ark.
What's this one?
The Ark of the Covenant.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
Some believe it was hidden beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Others claim it was taken away to Egypt or Ethiopia. Legends, expeditions, and conspiracy theories have surrounded the Ark for thousands of years, and an iconic Jewish filmmaker even made a little movie about this. Maybe you've heard of it. But even though the Ark has vanished, its memory lives on. Rabbinic literature describes the synagogue as a kind of miniature temple, a mikdash me'at. And like in the original temple, at the heart of the synagogue stands the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, a sacred cabinet holding the Torah scrolls, the Word of God itself. Number 4, the altars. The Jewish temple actually contained 2 altars. In the outer courtyard stood a massive bronze altar. Its perpetual plume of smoke was visible for miles as pilgrims made their way to the Temple Mount, and as they neared the holy hilltop, they would hear the crackle of fire, an animal sacrifice. All the while, the sound of the Levites singing echoed in the air. The outer altar was the physical and emotional center of temple activity, and because God commanded that the fire on the altar burn day and night, it was a constant hub of movement, ritual, fire, music, priests, and of course, animals. Now, to be clear, animal sacrifice was common throughout the ancient Near East. For most people in the region, sacrifice was understood as a way of feeding the gods. In Judaism, sacrifice functioned very differently. It wasn't about providing God with nourishment, but about creating a channel through which human beings could draw closer to the divine presence. In fact, the Hebrew word for sacrifice, korban, comes from a root word meaning to come close. And in temple times, different offerings expressed unique emotional and spiritual states: gratitude, celebration, devotion, or repair after wrongdoing. Blood too carried special significance because in the Torah, blood symbolizes life itself, which is fitting because the outer altar became a place where life in all its complexity, mortality, guilt, gratitude, devotion, all of these things intersected. But whereas the outer altar was a massive public structure filled with noise, crowds, sacrifice, the inner altar was something very different. Small, golden, and hidden deep within the sacred interior of the temple, this altar's sole purpose was the burning of incense. Every morning, the high priest would place incense upon the inner altar, filling the inside of the temple with fragrant smoke. The altars were lost to history, but their symbolism persists. After the destruction of the temple, Judaism underwent a profound transformation in which prayer gradually replaced sacrifice as the central ritual of Jewish life, recalling the daily offerings brought on the outer altar. As for the inner altar, every week, Jews around the world marked the conclusion of Shabbat with fragrant spices, an aroma evoking the sacred incense that once burned every day within the temple itself. Number 3, the bread table. Okay, this is one of the strangest items in the temple. Alongside the sacred fire, the golden vessels, and clouds of incense, sat a table covered with bread. In Hebrew, it was called the shulchan, and every Shabbat, priests would place 12 fresh loaves known as the lechem hapanim on its shelves, literally the bread of presence. And before you ask, no. Like the animal sacrifices of the outer altar, this was not food for God. Instead, many Jewish commentators understood the table as a symbol of blessing, abundance, and sustenance. In the ancient world, as is today, wheat emerged from the earth almost mysteriously, yet transforming it into bread required immense human labor. To place bread continually before God was to then acknowledge that nourishment comes from both human effort and something transcendent, something beyond human control. Also, according to tradition, this was miracle bread. Its crust never hardened, and its crumbs stayed soft and fresh all week long. And nothing went to waste. At the end of each week, the loaves were eaten together by the temple priests, which teaches us something important about the temple itself. In Judaism, holy spaces aren't meant to escape the physical world, but to partake in it. And even today, traces of the bread table remain in Jewish life. On Shabbat tables around the world, 2 loaves of challah are covered and set aside, and before the meal begins, Jews recite a blessing over them. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who brings forth bread from the earth. Number 2, the kiyor. Turns out one of the holiest objects in the temple was made from mirrors. You heard that right, not gold, not jewels, mirrors. According to Jewish tradition, after the exodus from Egypt, Israelite women donated their copper mirrors during the journey through the wilderness, and those mirrors were melted down to create the kiyor, the great wash basin of the temple. Initially, Moses was hesitant to use them. Mirrors were associated with beauty and physical desire, not exactly the vibe for a holy temple. But God reassured Moses that actually, these mirrors were especially beloved, because during slavery in Egypt, Jewish women used them not for vanity, but to preserve dignity and, ultimately, intimacy, which led to the continuity of Jewish life, even under oppression. But if the kiyor, the great copper wash basin, was forged from endurance and survival, its water offered renewal. Before performing any temple service, the priests were required to wash their hands and feet from the water of the kiyor. But this wasn't about physical dirt or personal hygiene. In Judaism, washing with water represents transition, a movement from ordinary into the sacred. And we see this pattern throughout Jewish life today. For example, when descendants of the ancient temple priests washed their hands before reciting the priestly blessing in synagogue, or when immersing in the mikveh, a spiritual bath, and in daily hand washing after waking up and before eating bread. It's through the act of washing that we cast off spiritual impurities and enter a more elevated state. Number 1, the menorah. The giant golden menorah is perhaps the single most recognizable symbol of the Jewish temple. And no, this isn't the 9-branch menorah we light on Hanukkah. That's technically called a Chanukiah. This menorah was a 7-branch lampstand created from a single piece of solid gold. The menorah stood opposite the bread table, inside the temple's inner chamber, and its lamps were tended daily by the priests using pure olive oil. Almost like a luminous tree suspended in the darkness, the menorah's flickering light would transform the temple's hushed sanctuary into something alive, almost ethereal. Because the menorah was never intended as an ordinary lamp, light is a powerful symbol in Judaism. The Torah itself is compared to light, and the prophet Isaiah famously describes the Jewish people as called to be a light unto the nations. The menorah's everlasting flame was a reminder of God's eternal presence, and in synagogues around the world, you'll find a lamp that always burns, recalling the glow of the holy menorah. But after the destruction of the temple, the menorah took on an even deeper meaning. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70 CE, they paraded the temple menorah through the streets of Rome as a trophy of conquest, a moment still immortalized today on the Arch of Titus. And then, the menorah disappears. No one knows for certain what became of it, but its image becomes central to Jewish life. In manuscripts, in art, in synagogues, and ritual, 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple, the menorah has become one of the most enduring symbols of Jewish survival and continuity. The menorah even became the official symbol of the modern state of Israel, which is remarkable when you think about it. Unlike other ancient civilizations, Judaism's defining symbol isn't a king or an animal or a weapon. It's light, it's wisdom, and it's the hope that even the smallest flame can eventually push back the darkness. These sacred vessels and artifacts brought holiness down here, down to earth. The ark that showed the power of failure and forgiveness, the basin that symbolized survival, the altars that connected to God, which is why 2,000 years after the temple was destroyed, the memory of its objects still lingers in your kitchen, at your synagogue, and on your table.